Welcome to Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf, and today we have Marguerite O'Connor, funeral celebrant, here with us. She wrote a book called Grief Struck with a co-author, and to tell us more about it, Marguerite, welcome to our program.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Tell me a little bit about your background. You are a funeral celebrant?
Yes.
And you went to school as a funeral director, right?
Correct. So my focus of my work now is as a funeral celebrant. I officiate at funeral, memorial, and celebration of life services, but I had previously attended mortuary school and also taught at a mortuary college for 9 years. And so I have worked in end of life for 30 years.
So how was it going to school when you started?
When I started, it was 10% female, and when I finished teaching there, it was 51% female, so that was one example of changes that had happened over time.
That's a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say a funeral director, or you went to mortuary school.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And was it for many different professions in the funeral the profession?
The students graduated, and most pursued being licensed as a funeral director and embalmer. And we had students that came from several different states and out of the country, so the rules where they were going back to were a little bit different.
Really? Oh, so it wasn't just a state license. You know, I'm thinking of a state license, but maybe not.
Correct. The students would graduate from the college, and then in Illinois, we had to serve a one-year apprenticeship before becoming licensed by the state.
I see. So there's still one more year of apprenticeship.
Yes.
Well, you have to explain more, or we would love to hear more about it, because this does seem to be a profession that we don't hear a lot about, right? And how do you think that has changed in our?
Yeah, I'm happy to report that there is a shift. For many years, people thought we were sort of a death-denying culture. But now there are people who know the importance of having the conversation. Many people can go to their local funeral home and put their wishes on file. So it's really good to have the conversation with your family about what you would want for your end-of-life decisions.
Well, you introduced yourself that way also, like you're passionate about the end of life. Can you explain to us what do you mean by the end of life? You know, people usually don't even want to talk about it, like you say, how to have that conversation and what to talk about.
Definitely. Well, there are a lot of options today. Some people are choosing cremation for their final disposition. Others choose burials. So if you don't have the conversation with your family and something happens, a death occurs, they sometimes are more stressed out. So it really, like I say, for me, it makes sense to have the conversation. My father died very young. I was a month old, so I never really knew my dad. So that, probably imprinted me at an early age for curiosity about end of life. My mother lived till age 78 and just died in 2001. And I had been introduced to the co-author of my book when someone said that they knew this woman, Mary Ann Green is her name, and she also was very passionate about working with hospice.
So you actually met your co-author after you were interested in writing this book?
That's correct. Yes, someone from hospice said you two should meet because you both are like on a mission to encourage people to have the conversation.
I see. And how was that collaboration? Was that, you guys see each other, or was it all online now? You know, many co-authors aren't even in the same state.
That is a great question, and we did meet up personally. We would oftentimes meet either at my office or at Mary Ann's home, and as we progressed in the book, we realized the challenge as well as the blessings of blending two voices and finding a smooth flow. So we would literally print out pages as we went along and arrange them on the countertop of Mary Ann's island in her kitchen, or we would move to the dining room table and spread things out. So we were, doing a lot ourselves previously and also working full time, but most of the time we met in person more than doing it online. Mm-hmm.
So this preparation work took probably 2 years or so? Or?
That is right, exactly. So it was a long process. And then when we were finally done with what I thought we were done with the book, Marianne is a perfectionist, and I say that respectfully, so she was not ready to release the book into the world yet, and I was like, really? Because we'd worked on it for so long, I was ready to let it go. And so, and then also I was able to use the book when I was teaching at the mortuary college, so that was helpful because I got immediate feedback from my students who were training to become funeral directors as well.
Yes, and I noticed your book, Grief Struck, is very interactive. You know, most self-help books isn't organized as a workbook so that you can have time to reflect. Tell us a little bit why you made it so interactive or like a workbook.
Right, thank you for noticing that. We felt that grief is so individual, and so we wanted people to be able to read the testimonials and quotes that we had in the book and also some solid information in the book, but we also wanted to allow time, as you said, for reflection or for their own personal experience with grief.
Because you feel that grieving is such a very personal experience.
Exactly, and I also feel that people need support, and we live in a culture that's very geographically dispersed, so people don't always have the support. I mean, there are wonderful support systems available and support groups, but it's not for everyone. Some people want to, do some of the work more privately, so this gives them an opportunity to feel that they are not alone, because we have testimonials from what other people experienced, and your experiences are always unique and different, but there are also some patterns that you may associate.
So the testimonials, they're from people you met or?
Exactly, and so we, of course, had written permission to use their testimonials, and some people had lost a child, and some people had a family member or loved one who completed suicide. So there were all different kinds of experiences. There were also testimonials from people. One guy lost his uncle, and when his uncle passed away and he got the call, he was prepared to book a flight and go to the service, and then he was surprised to find out that the family was not going to have any service. Mm-hmm. So this is another example of some of the changing trends in funeral service, that people may choose not to have a service or have a memorial service.
And I think that's often very difficult when the rest of the family don't get that opportunity to meet in a social setting to grieve, right?
Exactly. And so we would ask people, why is it that you chose? No judgment, but just, why is it that you maybe chose to not have a service? And sometimes the answers were that people thought they were protecting their children from pain or expense of the funeral. But what we found also is that sometimes people really wanted to have that opportunity to have someone witness their loss, mm-hmm. and validate and give them hugs or bring food or whatever people do to try to make you feel comforted and loved.
Yeah, it's a social event.
It is definitely a social event. Yeah. As a matter of fact, a lot of people are having even food at the funeral home, for example. So food is a part of sharing our cultures and showing love and all of that. So, yeah.
That is very true. And there's you say that you officiate funerals in this non-denomination, so various cultures you meet, right?
Exactly. We are part of a global community, and so sometimes there might be a person of one faith married to a person of a different faith. And with all due respect to clergy are doing a wonderful job as well, but sometimes people want what they would describe as more of a spiritual service, mm-hmm. rather than religious. So when I meet with a family, I do an intake where I ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is spiritual and 10 is religious. Teach me, where do we fall in? Mm-hmm. And then I also generally meet with families personally, but if they prefer to meet online or over the phone or with texting, we use all forms of communication, and I capture the story and the legacy of the person who died, and then I function as the master of ceremony, and sometimes I'm the only speaker, other times I am introducing friends and family who knew the person as well.
I think that's very interesting, because sometimes when you have to choose a clergy, it can, by itself, it could be a very difficult decision, right? Parts of the family may not believe they should be represented that way, and so you talk to your family or about what they are seeking. Yeah.
Absolutely. They help me understand their vision for the service. Sometimes they have an idea how long they want the service to be. So I ask a lot of questions to flush out that information and to get their vision of this service. I'm working with a family right now where the person who passed away was a musician, and so there will be musicians at the service as well. Other times we have music on a DVD, but music can be a very important part of the service as well.
When you say your book serves as a support group for the reader and the grieving person, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I feel that there's so many, there isn't enough talk really about end of life, how to deal with end of life perhaps. We do have a growing aging population, but then I have plenty of friends who are children of elder adults, and maybe they are terminally ill, maybe they have Alzheimer's, but then the caretaker don't have very much support even towards the end of life to deal with the end of life.
That's another great point. And caregivers, it's a very special calling as well, and it can be very depleting. But in our book, we also have a disclaimer that we say, we recognize the importance of counselors. So the book is not intended to replace counseling, but it does give people an opportunity, and sometimes they'll even bring their book that they're journaling to their session if they're meeting with a psychologist.
Yes, I think.
And having the conversation, there as well. It's sort of like a way to flush out feelings and thoughts, and again, continue on with the conversations.
Yes, I think that might be just as helpful, because sometimes it's not after, even maybe before that, they're already dealing with some of these questions, right? Yeah.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, I have a very good friend whose mother just died on Mother's Day, and so her mother was 91, and the death was expected. Her mother was enrolled in hospice care, but going forward, again, like Mother's Day will always be a special day, and you may, bring up memories for her about the fact that was the day that her mother crossed over. So, yeah.
You mentioned that you're often the person who's ready to have this conversation. How do you have this conversation? Because I find it very awkward, right? Because like one of my friends said, when she was taking care of her mother with Alzheimer's, and so she knew that her mother was losing her faculties, and that time I was pregnant, and my friend said, "Wow, I envy you. Have classes that go on 4 or 6 weeks about how to prepare for birth, and there's no classes to how do you prepare for the end of life." Do you feel that's changing now?
I do. There is great work being done by hospice. I myself go out into the community and present educational programs. And the topic, sometimes I do include, the word death, like lessons learned from dealing with death. And sometimes people will come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, that sounded depressing. I wasn't going to come to this program. I'm so glad I came," because it's very freeing when you can have the conversation and feel a little more empowered about the decision making. So I think that's all really important.
And I often also relate it to my Chinese culture. That in Chinese culture, we try to avoid the word death all the time. But when I explain to American or Western audiences, sometimes they find, "Oh, that's so funny." But I feel like in the West, in American culture, we also try not to say death, right? We try to avoid these terms to. And I remember on the radio there was a story one time about a town where something like 75% of the elderly have their what's it called, medical directive, and in that town it was amazing how they could have, because most Americans, I think the statistics is something like 10%
Right.
or 20%. So certainly Americans are avoiding discussion
Right. Well, and there's an interesting Pew Research study showing that young people oftentimes don't have a particular religious affiliation.
Oh,
So
yes.
if they're not part of an organized religion, then when a death occurs, sometimes they don't have that structure of the religion or their culture. As we blend cultures, we have more fusion funerals and things of that nature. So again, it's worthy of consideration to just say, what can I do now that's going to relieve the stress? Because many Americans feel very stressed out, very busy. So when the death occurs, this can just add to their stress. And there are a lot of things that they can do beforehand. Like you can put together a DVD for your loved one's birthday party. You don't have to wait until the death occurs, and then there may be a DVD with photos. So these are things again that you can do during a period of calm and not make these important decisions on one of the most stressful days of your life.
You mean, oh, I'm sorry, you said DVD for their birthday?
A lot of the funeral tributes now, if you look online, like on the death notices, there are photos of the person and their life, sort of like a celebration of their life.
Yes.
Or some families still put together like a poster board that they bring to the funeral home on display. So these are snapshots of the life that the person lived. Make sense?
Yes, yes. It's definitely more positive and uplifting and celebrating living, right?
Right,
The life they have
exactly.
given.
Exactly. And also, what is a part of their legacy? So one of the courses that I love to teach is called Legacy Letters, or also known as Ethical Wills. And this is a concept where you don't wait until the person dies to tell them how they had a positive imprint in your life. You can call them on the phone or text them or write them a handwritten letter, email, whatever form of communication you use. But it's very important to just let people know. So I not only enjoy teaching this class, I practice what I preach. So I was sending out some holiday cards in December, and I was thinking of one of my former employers, and on his holiday card, I just wrote maybe 5 sentences. But those 5 sentences, they meant a lot to him. So when he received the card, he called me. I was visiting my sister in Santa Fe, and he said, "Oh, honey, I just received your card, and I'm very moved by this." And it only took me a few minutes. That's the point. It only took me a few minutes to reflect and tell him why he was a wonderful employer who imprinted my life in many ways. He had also been one of my instructors at Loyola University. So again, these are small thing on our part, but it can mean a lot to the person who's receiving.
Well, that's a very helpful tip, because I feel like our Americans are very busy, right? With the way we eat, the way we go to work,
Right.
and we're not really. We're taking less and less time to reflect. And I think our
Exactly.
young people are also living screen to screen. Not
Right.
not really reflecting about what does this mean. What does this person mean to me?
Well, and I think, again, in our culture, it's so nice to be an encourager. So even when I wrote the book, I'm so grateful that I had family members and friends who encouraged me on that path, because there are some struggles. And even, some of my friends had book signing in their home for me, or they would buy the book. And just in many ways, they were very supportive. And I love living in this community. I've been in Glenview for 30 years. My husband and I have lived here, and I feel like our community really values education. I had book signings at the library or at local bookstores. So we are a community that really, we encourage education and reading and supporting the arts, and that's all a wonderful thing.
No, I think that's true. I think our community, from the parents, mothers I've met, that they just very open to talk about things that really need to be talked about.
Exactly. And I think even, having a book for me, doing the book was just to get the message out, because I felt like I had a unique experience, and my co-author also had a unique experience, and we were blending those ideas to be of service to others. And I think that with self-publishing now, you have many opportunities. It's less expensive to be able to get your book published, and print on demand means you don't have to have a box
yes.
full of books in your garage.
Right.
That they're as they're ordered, they're printed and shipped, so we can use technology for that purpose. And My friend Helen Gallagher has lived in Glenview in many years. She helped me format the book. And so if there are parts of publishing that maybe you feel like it's not your strength, that just know that there are professionals available to help you get it launched, because many people tell me that they still had a manuscript in their drawer, or they never got around to getting it up and out. So I like to encourage people to know that it's become much more affordable and much more doable. And it's sort of like that saying, that we don't want to die with the music still in us, right? So
Did you always Did you always know you were going to publish, or was it something that someone approached you about?
That's a great question again. My sister Kathleen, she lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She used to write abstracts for medical journals. So again, there are other writers in my family. I always have a notebook with me. If I hear a turn of phrase or something like that, it gets my interest, and I'll jot it down. So I'm always with my journals. And I tell people, even in my Toastmasters group where we practice public speaking and leadership skills, if you get an idea, even if you just drop that idea, write it down in a notebook or put it in a manila file folder so you can come back to it. I also enjoy entering contests. Like I write for Open to Hope, which is an online support group, and occasionally they'll have a contest. They'll throw out a theme and they'll say, we want you to write something brief, maybe 300 words about this topic. And one time I won a $100 gift certificate for Amazon, and it's just
That's
nice.
very
It's nice,
encouraging.
exactly. It's encouraging to other authors to be able to write something fairly quickly or about a particular subject, maybe Valentine's Day or something that's coming up. Yeah, so that's all really helpful. And then over my years in end of life, I also would go to special seminars. I went to Colorado to study with Dr. Alan Wolfelt, and I would take a course on complicated grief or suicide loss, things of that nature.
I was going to ask you about that. Like, in your experience, that the way the person goes, the way of death, the manner in which they go, affects the grieving? Because I recently also on the radio, I heard that the Columbine anniversary when it came up, that the mother of one of the perpetrators wrote a book, and she said she went to a support group that was for first victim. Well, there's support groups apparently for victims of mass deaths, and then, or what's it called, violent deaths, and then there are also support groups for people who are family of perpetrators of
Right.
violence, death by violence. So I was surprised, but I was very glad in a way that there are so many ways to receive some kind of help and not feel alone.
Yes, exactly. And I have been called in to officiate funerals where sometimes, to your point, it's like the perpetrator's side of the family or something where they may feel like they're not getting community support because
yeah.
of the particulars of the situation, or maybe the individual did die and return gunfire with the police or something like that. So when I officiated those services, I don't go there to judge anyone. I'm just there because grief is grief. And, I can think of one situation where the mother, she was grieving too because of something that her son had done, and he ended up dying as a result of that. We do see a problem with death with overdose and drugs and things of that nature. So these issues, I'm not projecting that someone will have a complicated grief situation, but it is possible when there are these extenuating circumstances.
Yes, that does make the survivor feel a multitude of emotions.
Exactly, various emotions, and sometimes people are angry at them, and they don't always get the same type of emotional support.
That's just really true, and that's really interesting. I think that's why your Grief Struck book, I felt that when I was reading it, that it dealt with sudden deaths that you had no time to prepare for, and others that, let's say, a family member of Alzheimer's patient, you might feel you have spent years preparing or thinking about the end of life, but they're still not. Oh, no one is perhaps ready.
Right. And when you mentioned Alzheimer's a couple of times, that's a really important topic for so many people. And we refer to secondary losses as well. So what I mean by that is sometimes a person is still alive, but they have had a loss of their health, or they have lost their home, had to move to assisted living, things of that nature. So these are still very significant losses. Divorce would be another example. So the person's still alive, but you're navigating some other issues, and this is another reason why I say loss is loss, and we don't judge it. We don't say this loss is worse than another loss, because when it happens to you, that's when it's a painful thing that you have to navigate. And we also try to learn some lessons from the loss. I was speaking for a support group, widows and widowers, and the person who facilitated contacting me for the program, she called and said as they were advertising it, there was another group at their church that had been divorced, and they asked, can they come to the presentation? I said, of course, all are welcome. And it helped me to know that there were also some people who were divorced in the audience, because I tailor my remarks more specifically, knowing that they're there as well. The topic for that one was holiday grief. And so as you can imagine, the holidays can be very challenging for someone who is divorced, because maybe their adult children have to decide, do I go with mom or dad, or who am I going to spend the time with? So it brings up a lot of issues.
Well, thank you very much, Marguerite, for joining us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation. It was good to be with you. And I'm thankful to my friend Bev from American Association of University Women in Glenview, who made the connection with you and me. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. See us next time on Off the Shelf.